I'm Katie,
I'm Josie.
and this is Something Spookish. And we have a special edition today. We have Greg Walters with us. Greg, welcome.
Hi
Hi, Greg.
to both
Um,
of you.
It's so
yes,
good
yes,
to
welcome.
finally have you on the podcast. This has been a long time coming.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invite, and I deeply appreciate being here.
Wonderful. Well, and I think we got our paths crossed because we're both interested in different aspects of the paranormal, but more and more Josie and I have been coming across stories about cryptids and other beings, more so than just ghosts and spirits and things. And so that's why we're so excited to talk to you today. Greg, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a recently developed author. Prior to this, I also also during this, I should say, I help people with their Medicare insurance plans, which is not the most exciting thing, but you get to meet a lot of interesting elders. Um,
Oh,
and from that, but going back in time, before that, I worked on tugboats going around the world, or at least once or twice, and then also worked on fishing boats in Alaska. I was in the Coast Guard. I'm an avid hiker. I spend a lot of time up in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm also a map collector, which is a very strange hobby, but I have a collection of about 1,200 Forest Service maps dating back to the turn of the century. So finding these old pack trails and going out there on the ground and relocating this stuff is really fun.
you're
Uh,
never going to
Wow.
be lost.
I'm never going to be lost. Just like what Daniel Boone once said was that I've never been lost, just a mite confused for a few days.
I'll find my way.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
And
is
so
is it in all of your travels that you like, how did you even, it sounds like you have been involved in so much, but not necessarily anything to do with cryptids, and so I'm wondering, how did you even begin to get involved in that area?
stumble into this thing. Um,
Yeah.
well, for many years, I foraged for mushrooms. I've done some deer hunting and fishing and so forth like that, mainly like commercial fishing. But within all of that, spending a lot of time in the backcountry, going into areas, I was always fascinated with these overlooked areas, 5 to 10 square miles, where they have not the high mountain peaks and the crystal lakes, just these mountainous forested areas that might have ponds and different sorts of features to them, but normally unattractive to most people because most people want to have that scenery. And so within that, I'm also an avid student of local history, especially regional history of, say, Northern California, Southern Oregon, going back to Euro American times, but then digging in further into the Native American and and the tribes, their ability to live on the land. And then that quickly led me into their creation lore. And within the
Oh,
creation
interesting.
lore, this is where it really gets fun. And it's really not that dissimilar to our own Greek mythology, where they have these 25-foot salamanders that live in lakes, and the stories of Coyote and how Coyote is the trickster, and he's always doing something mischievous, but how he brought fire to the natives. And so it just dives into their ability to survive in an otherwise inhospitable landscape. This is what got me into the story. And then from there, what it was I was at a time in my life where I was at kind of a crossroads, and I decided to take a walk in an area that I knew was kind of a sacred area, at least in part. I didn't know. So that's what led me into this place. And stupidly, I just kind of stumbled into this. And what was fascinating with it was, after my encounter, and once I got back home, and even like years later, taking some classes by native elders, they told me what I experienced, and I didn't even tell them, about it, other than I mentioned, what are your thoughts on like this, with the cryptid, and with Sasquatch. They all have different names for them, and so it depends on what language, what linguistic stock, and also the personal meaning that it means to to them. Some of them are very malevolent, some are very benevolent, and it really depends on who's approaching them.
Oh,
So, I'm,
interesting. So you're saying okay, so my first question is it sounds like you actually ran into one and then asked about your experience. And two, I've never heard it described that way, but I think what you're saying makes sense based of all the stories that I've heard about people's encounters with Bigfoot. They either seem really kind and that they're not there to hurt you, but then in other times people have seriously sounds like thought they were going to die, that maybe they were under attack, and so to hear that it could go both ways is really interesting. And
yeah.
that depends on how you approach them.
Yes, almost certainly.
Intention.
Yeah.
Huh.
Uh, I mean, some of that too is that, so then tie into this, if you guys really want to go, while we're exploring this, is it goes quickly into their, because Bigfoot would be similar to our Jesus. And,
Oh,
but,
really?
but then
For the
who is
native
God?
people?
Yes.
Oh, I've
Yeah.
never heard it described that way. That's so interesting.
Okay. Yeah. There's a book, a friend of mine, a colleague, um, from the Oregon Caves National Monument. And this was a book he wrote. It's called American Elves. And it's an
Oh,
encyclopedia of the little people from, based on 380 ethnic groups throughout the Western Hemisphere. And this is just the Western Hemisphere. What about the Northern Hemisphere? And so when you get into the little people, the way I break it off is in three different groups. You've got dwarves that are afflicted with basically a medical ailment, a disability of sorts, but they're living people, and we see them in movies and so forth like this. Afflicted with this, it's a bone disease. It's like a degenerative bone disease. And then you also have small people, and those, like, they've found skeletons in caves and so forth. Like there's a cave in Wyoming where they found about six of them, and these things stood about 2.5, 3 feet tall, but they were humans. I have a picture in one of my books from India where the guy stands 22 inches tall and he's 56 years old. But I mean, these are humans. They're just small people. Okay. And then now this is where it gets fun, and you guys will rock on this, is the spiritual side of this. And these things they take on many different forms. They shapeshift. They live for 2 to 3,000 years. The same fellow that wrote this book, John, one of his friends and a colleague, or like a fellow Park Service worker, was up at Mount Rainier National Park. He was working on like a generator. It was right in September, so the first snows had fallen up there. And he's out there, traipsing around. He goes over to this little shed and he's working on it, and he hears these little footfalls. And he looks out and he sees this thing. It just goes, and it's about 2.5 feet tall with deer legs and a human body. And it goes running into a little
yeah.
side gulch, boom, gone. Um, and
What did I just see?
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's one of the little people where they manifest into their form, or into their true form.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. And it's the
yeah,
little people that you're saying have this spirit component.
yeah. So they live for 2 to 3,000 years, as best as we know. We really don't even know, but there's lots of stories about them. There's lots of lore. If you ask native elders anywhere, even Colorado especially, they definitely, I mean, there's no like, well, maybe, yeah. No, they're spot on. Yeah, these things are real. They're highly respected. Like out here in the deserts, if you were ever to even get a glimpse of one, the best place to see one is at a spring. And the spring, that is so key because that is life. Water is life in the desert. These little spirituals are going to be there from time to
The
time.
shape shifting is really interesting. Like
Yeah.
that is that's a real thing is shape shifting.
Yeah, that's the salamander. And or at least that's what I saw, and to me it was just the most awesome, beautiful Pacific giant salamander. And it was so weird because I had these guys as pets when I was a kid, and then here I am, confronting the salamanders. Here he is right here. So on my encounter, what it was, the first night I went to one place, and I basically burned some sage, and I was in a very emotional state. I may have said at least once, or whispered like, yes, I'd like to have an encounter. I'm open to this. This kind of mentality going through my head. as I was releasing this fragrant smoke into the air, very small amount. It's all very small, but I think that was the trigger. And then from there, they had to do so test number two. So I went back to my car, repacked my pack that next day, took off onto this other trail that was a 60-mile loop hike in the southern part of a wilderness area. And on night number two, I went to a place, beautiful meadow. There was actually, believe it or not, there was a communal bear pooping area. And so where there were like piles and piles and piles of bear poop, which I thought was very strange. But I've actually heard different stories about this in these mountain ranges. Um, and so at any rate, I go over to this stream to get some water, and it's this beautiful spring bubbling out from these old cedars. And there right in the little spring was this beautiful salamander, a Pacific giant. And wow, look, a big bold Italy. That's what I used to call him. And so I picked him up and thanked him for being there, and placed him back down very carefully. And that next night, I had my encounter, and that was in a place. It was an amphitheater. It was where there was a trail junction, but the trails are basically like deer traces. I mean, they're barely wildlife trails, really. But there's cairns out there in certain places. It takes an effort to find them. And so, but basically from there, I continued on my hike the next day, and came back out. And years later, this is where I had an elder tell me that, well, the way they do it, within the apprentices or the shamans, that, when they go up to these areas, they know they're on the right track, and they know they're doing all the right things when they encounter a salamander in a spring. And then that next night, you'll have your encounter. And then what they do is they sing a song of introduction, and then they sing a song seeking knowledge. And had I known those songs, I would have communicated with this thing. And
Oh,
And
so,
wow.
when you say, it sounds like after you see the salamander, they're saying that's your sign that you'll have an encounter. What do you mean by an encounter?
well, that's where you would then that next night, right at the right time of power. And Carlos Castaneda touched on this in his book Tales of Power, where it's that thin red line. It's that time between day and into night, and it's a very sacred time, actually. Where you're in this transition in our world, and that's when this thing appeared. And it was also on the night of not only a full moon but a blue moon, and the
And you
moon
mean
had,
a and I'm so sorry. Are you saying that you encountered like a Sasquatch, as we would call it?
yes.
Okay, okay, that's what I was just trying to make sure of.
Yeah, that was the upslope people. And there's different names for them. They have the sky people, the above the clouds people, and they all have different tribal names, and it's based on their linguistic stock. That's why it's really amazing. Like within the Sioux lore, I think one of the things they say, that if you can just approach one of those things and just touch him finger to finger, that you will get power that allows you, where nature will come to you.
Oh,
And,
wow.
another thing with these things too, I should mention, is that once you're in their area, they already know you're there. And so then they come to you, you don't go to them. And that's a common misnomer I think people have with these, that, they're constantly in
Like
search
going to go find it, but no, it has to come to you. Interesting. How do I touch fingers with a Sasquatch?
of, walk up, get your finger out,
And just
if you,
hope that he
right.
Just
reciprocates?
you
Yeah,
gotta
you got
find
it.
one, Josie,
Yeah,
and they
you
have to
have
find
to,
you.
No, they have
you,
to find me. Yeah.
because within my encounter with this thing, I mean, it looked at me with these eyes that were these icy gray. I mean, he looked right through me. He could read everything about me. And, I just felt like there was no hiding anything from this thing. That it
Wow.
knew exactly my thoughts, my intentions.
Did he just
Fear,
Was this like a like stereotypical big hairy thing? Yeah,
just like that,
yes. Just
but
like
just
that.
like
thinner.
that in
Yeah,
the
but
photo
thinner.
Bigger.
that you have?
Yeah.
Was this at
Wow.
nighttime or in the this
Yes.
was at the time
It
of the
sounds like
power, the transition of
dusk.
the day,
Yeah.
dusk.
And so it was basically completely dark, and it was in the shadow of the very top of the ridge line. The other thing that was weird with my encounter, I dropped my pack when I got to this place. I said, okay, there's got to be a camp here somewhere, a nice flat area, semi-forested. And but there was two things going, actually three things going on there. One was that it was a geologic transition zone. And so it was going from dacite to serpentine. And serpentine is the rock that's at the Earth's mantle. And in this case, it had been uplifted. And one thing about Southwest Oregon and Northwest California is they have one of the largest unbroken sheets of serpentine. It's mineral rich, calcium poor. So it's going to invite plant species that are known literally nowhere else. And so it's this majorly biodiverse area. And then the other one was more of a granitic or even volcanic source. And so now you get the conifer forests and like this. But still, when you're on that contact zone, my question is that a point of reference these things can find from even like up there? And so if this thing was traveling from this other world, and this is another thing when you get into, like how do these, like origins, we can discuss that as far as dimensional theory versus them traveling like a traversable wormhole. That's what I played with within my book because it's science fiction. So the encounter, what had happened was I get up on this ridgeline, I'm camped there, the sun's going down, and I strip off my clothes to basically throw some water over my head. I warmed up some water and I walked over to a place where there was a nice flat rock, but I looked down and see a footprint. Boom. And this is a bare footprint. And over by my camp too, there was like footprints, but they were smeared. I thought it was like a couple of bears in a fight. I didn't know because it was dried mud. And so at any rate, I see this footprint. I'm absolutely freaked. But I thought, okay, this is cool. It's kind of weird where you're freaked, but you found something very good. As the sun's going down, I'm basically, cleaning up myself and I go back to my pack and I'm sitting on a rock. And then this thing just emerges within the amphitheater and it goes walking over, crash, 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 boom, 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 goes over to this pond that's not too far away from me and starts drinking. He's drinking, drinking, slurping, and slurping, and slurping. I can hear him, but he was kind of bent over, so I couldn't really see him. And it was dark. He was on the dark side of the amphitheater. Had he been up on the ridge, he would have probably had like the moonrise, hitting him. From there, I hear a splash, 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 crash, crash, boom, 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 going like a semicircle around me. And now I can see him, but it was just his shadow. And he was thin, athletic, 8.5, maybe 9 foot tall. Knew exactly where he was going, gave me a look of just this icy stare, looking right through me. I was frozen. I was
Wow.
holding
How
a
far away do you
flashlight.
think he was?
How big do I?
Sorry, how far away was he from you?
How far away? He was probably about 80 feet.
Oh my
If I
gosh,
guess,
wow.
yeah, 70 or 80 feet or so, not far. And I got a good look at him, but he was very, very athletic. Wasn't quite the overweight, definitely wasn't like the Patterson Gimlin, you know, this frumpy Bigfoot. So from there, he just basically does a semicircle and he's going down the hill. Well, of course, I'm freaked for the next 2 hours,
Oh, yeah.
sitting there quietly. I'm by myself. And that's probably one of the powers of why he even emerged was because I was by myself. And so within all of this, though, it occurred to me later that it's like, well, this thing must have been someplace where there was no water because there was water up on the ridge line. Why didn't he just drink water up there if he dropped down from the ridge? Now, he could have been what they call cloaking and hiding in place, but I walked right by where he emerged from. And, I don't know, unless that cloaking stuff works really well, I would have seen him. And or did he emerge from the other place? And I'll leave that to your vivid imagination as to where that is.
And so you
Um,
mean by the other place, like, maybe emerged through, like, some kinda portal or just from
yes,
somewhere else?
yeah, from somewhere
Okay.
else. And and these things I posit as a question rather than me explaining definitively this is what it was because I really don't know. But it was a fascinating, and another thing that was very interesting with it was that I felt as though he had emerged from someplace else.
Oh,
And
wow.
um, and that did I get to see where, like, most of the time people camping and so forth, or they're driving down a road and they see him run across the road or something like this. Well, did I get to meet this thing at his point of origin? And so
Wow.
that
Oh,
emerges upon the world here. And so I don't
It
know.
it
Um,
sounds like you were in a very special spot that could have been.
yeah, yeah. And and then from there, the rest of my hike, I mean, once again, okay, we didn't touch fingers, but I just felt like the animal world, like the bears, because they're constantly running into bears up there. And the bears they just continued playing in meadows and doing their thing. And I just got to sit there and watch them.
Oh,
And,
wow.
so I become like this watcher with them. It was fun. It was enlightening. It was very fun. I just felt like I was part of it rather than being above it or below it. And so, yeah, that was an
That's so
important.
powerful.
Yeah, it was great. So I do my hike, and actually years later I would develop myself into a situation where I gathered business support from the local community, and we expanded the Oregon Caves National Monument. And so that involved, testifying before the Senate subcommittee, meeting the Secretary of the Interior, handing her a packet. That was the power of me being on this board with Crater Lake and all this good stuff. And it's funny because you wonder if, like, okay, did I have this encounter? Did this thing want me to dot 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 within my world, within the things that I could do for our natural world? That was one. And so,
huh. Well,
at
and
least,
you're the expert on Sasquatch, I would say. One of
well,
the experts
One of
and little
them.
people. And so maybe it showed itself to you for this purpose, so that you might be the best person to bring it to the world.
that could be. I feel like there's so much that, and that's what I describe in the book too, where I did it through other people's narrative, so to speak. In other words, using character to invite the story, and describe situations that we've done to our earth, and how we've made it where, at what point are we way past sustainability, and where does that lead to? And is that another future these things portend? And that's one thing about the little people, is that, I mean, talking, imagine holding God. You know, I mean, I never looked at it like that. I just thought it was a cool salamander. But within their lore and within their belief system, that was totally what happened.
Wow.
That's incredible. And so you had this initial experience and I don't it sounds like there are much better names to call this being other than Sasquatch or Bigfoot and
There
when I was looking on your website, do you refer to them are they also referred to as the Immortals or the Giants?
Yeah, so the Immortals would be the little people. And so those are,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So there's
right.
two entities going on, just like God and Jesus, the Son of God. And that within this, that Jesus is the one that's the teacher, but also so are the little people. And that's between the shaman really and the little person, and that's all on his approach. That's all, they say that the little people are very sad because they live this life of 2 or 3 thousand years, but a shaman at best might live up to 100 years. And so they build a close relationship with this wonderful person that then dies. And so then that starts all over again and again and again and again. And so, and this is also, I'm drawing from also doctoral dissertations written about this stuff, within like the anthropological libraries. UC Berkeley has a fantastic one. Um,
No way. I wouldn't have thought that. That's so it because my curiosity when we first started talking to you is I hadn't heard, of course you hear about, elves being a part of mythology, but
right.
not necessarily in the way that you described.
Yeah.
And I just wonder why it's not more
Here's
popular.
another one. Yeah. Well, most people don't do the research. And so this is one
And like
called
monsters.
Man Like Monsters on Trial.
Oh.
And so this is where, PhDs are digging into native lore, trying to make some sense of it. And there's a lot there, and this is, and once again, think language. One of the things I've been gathering up are these little, they're like little books. Now you're speaking Yurok. Now you're speaking, whatever tribe it is. And so it's kind of like a little language tutorial for college students to be able to learn the lingua franca, the region. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and this, I mean, from there you go into the dances, and the dances, I mean, they're world renewal ceremonies and, stuff like this, where it's like the deerskin dance, the jump dance, what they mean and why they do them. And, it's all around renewing the world. Um, there's a great book called The Inland Whale, where a whale, and actually this happened about six or no, probably 10 years ago. These two whales come into the Klamath River, and it was a mother and daughter, and the mother tells the daughter, "You must leave, you must go back to sea, leave me, I am here to die." And the mother rolls over and dies in the bay. And um and that absolutely freaked out the natives, because that's the inland whale. And what that showed was that the world was wildly out of balance. And it was so interesting because these dances happen on alternate years. And that was the year of the jump dance. And so, which fell right in line, because the way you rewrite the world is you jump, and they jump for 10 days going at it. And they got to prepare, they have to sweat, they have to only eat certain foods at certain times. And it's all very, very regimented. But they do this ceremony that then appeases the little people, and that's why they put their heart and soul in it. And the goal is to see that it's blessed by the little people.
Josie, guess what? I love smoothies. Did you know this about me?
Oh, this I did.
Oh, good. Well, I used to make them every day for years before I'd go to school or work. I felt so good, so nourished, so ready for my day, but eventually I had to stop because my bulky blender was such a hassle. But now, I've gotten my smoothies back, and that's because of the BlendJet 2 portable blender. BlendJet 2 is portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach.
It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease.
BlendJet 2 is whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house.
Lasts for 15 plus blends and recharges quickly via USB C. Best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go.
With over 30 plus colors and patterns to choose from, there's a BlendJet 2 to complement just about any style. Right now, I'm enjoying the Seafoam Green BlendJet for my mornings.
Whew. And I like to rock the black marble print because it makes me feel like a badass. What are you waiting for? Go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. And be sure to use the promo code SPOOKISH12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you'll love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with a BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to blendjet.com and use the code SPOOKISH12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever.
One of my favorite stories was this one, The Lore of Big Sur. And this is down in Northern California. And this is a story of the Dark Watchers. This one is written by Thomas Steinbeck. But within this, the Dark Watchers, what was so crazy with it? So these are the little people of Big Sur. And these are based on the Ohlone and Essalon tribes that are within that area around the Santa Lucia Mountains. And these little people, so Olive Steinbeck, that was John Steinbeck's mother, so that would have been Thomas's grandmother. She was a teacher in the hills, and she would go to these different ranchos and teach the kids. And when she'd go over this one pass, she would leave like some little trinkets and like a little display of things on a rock and an apple and like this. And then when she would return, there'd be this perfect array of acorns and feathers and like this. Well, that was her contact with the Dark Watchers. And these are the significance with this story that's so cool was that it dated back into Spanish California, where they called them literally Los Vigilantes Oscuros, literally meaning the Dark Watchers. And so the knowledge extends back even within our Euro American history of recognizing the little people.
Oh my
I've been
goodness.
to Big Sur, and there's a lot of mountain, hill, and forest, so I'm not surprised that there's little people.
I recently visited, because Josie, the way you were describing Big Sur, it sounds a
Hmm.
lot like how you would describe Hawaii. And I was there recently and looking into
Hmm.
some of the lore there, and they were talking about the Menehune, which was really interesting. And would that be a version of the little people?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Even though they say, there's this mixed story of, well, the Menehune were real, et cetera, but, real, like, were they more aligned with the little people where they're a spiritual entity? Because I don't think they ever found any physical evidence of these things. And, this is the thing, the whole Bigfoot debate or Sasquatch debate is that, within the scientific community, they don't want to touch this thing because they really don't have much physical evidence. They say, well, they hide their bones and they do all this stuff. Yeah, I don't know. If you've ever been out on the ground with a physical archaeologist, they're super good at spotting this stuff. Yeah, and they know how to spot like a bird point and all these different tools that are used on that Paleolithic level. And so it's
So that suggests that if they're not just hiding their bones, then what something you touched on a little bit earlier, which I'd love to discuss, something it sounds like maybe the little people and Sasquatch beings would do is potentially travel through portals or wormholes or some kind of interdimensional means, which kind of feels like the only possible explanation because we can't find them and they're just, they seem like they take up a lot of room. You feel like we'd be, we
right.
have these one-off instances where you hear about people having encounters, but they're not, like bears, and you think they would be just so easy to find. So I have no idea what else could possibly be if it wasn't some kind of portal or interdimensional travel. So,
Mhm.
um, but I never hear about that really. So how did you find out more about that aspect?
It's a difficult one to touch on, and there's actually been a couple of books written on it. The Quantum Bigfoot, Ron Moorhead touches on this. That's based on, from his research, and that's what led him down this rabbit hole and or wormhole. The tricky see the hard part about this is that one of my hippie friends up on one of the communes in Oregon, okay, hippies in Oregon smoking pot and lawn care and all this. Oh, did we mention his brother? His brother is Kip Thorne, who is one of four scientists that sat on the panel that approved a young Stephen Hawking's doctoral thesis to get him into Cal Poly and to do all his work that he did. Um, and also, I think 3 years ago, it was a Nobel Prize in Science um, for basically developing a device that measures exploding black holes in the universe. And so this is Kip Thorne. You can look him up online. Fantastic. He thinks wormholes don't even exist. You're crazy. You know, um, but the thing I counter that with is that, well, wait a minute, we fully know all of 3% of the universe. And so, never mind the other 97%. And the other thing there too is that in July, I mean, this even adds more fodder to this, is that two big news developments. One was the discovery of new particles within the Hadron Collider and leading us closer step by step to the dimensional theory, or, adding more credo to it as a theory rather than just a hypothesis. And then the other one that was big were the images coming back from the James Webb Telescope. And so, leading us closer and closer into these galaxies. And at what point are we going to find a habitable planet? And so, and then we
Yeah.
just have to figure out how do they get from point A to point B.
I mean, I personally am a little biased because I think I support that theory. And
Mhm.
Josie, when we did our episode on extraterrestrial enlightenment,
The portals.
the portals, so many portals, a lot of the foundation of that episode was explaining that a lot of the things that, you know, that is part of our mythology or our legends, that those are all things that are actually based in reality. not only that, but that they are all extraterrestrial based. So that was really interesting for me to read about and to continue to research and um, for a lot of gaps and of course we have no way of knowing, we can't know, but it sure is interesting to talk about and theorize. But to me it makes sense and maybe I talk about this in that episode too. Maybe that's the problem is that because it does answer questions, it's kinda comforting, but
Mhm,
I really can't it seems to fill in a lot of the gaps that I have when I think about these different beings and how they coexist with us on Earth and how they can possibly do that without being detected as much, and
mhm.
so I find that theory one that I support.
I'm on
Well,
board the portal theory. Yeah.
and to add to that, like a lot of my friends are extreme biologists and wildlife biologists. I mean, they're out there at 2 in the morning. They're out at all hours of the night and day, crawling around the hills and in the streams and up on the ridges. And why aren't they running into Bigfoot? That's why they that's why they kind of blink twice when I get into this topic, because they just find it doggone hard to believe. Yeah.
Well, I think you make a good point too when you had your encounter about being alone and having good intention and being open to it. Whereas I just don't think that's the case for a lot of people, nor do we really put ourselves in a situation to experience that. Maybe even if you're trying, because even like the Bigfoot shows, they've got like a crew and a whole bunch
Right.
of people and they're
Right.
hunting for it.
Right. So it's a whole different take than what most people and probably from what you guys have ever heard was like, well, I saw a Bigfoot and he went running. He took off into the bush, like this.
Yeah.
And there's no context. There's no, okay, what does this mean? And why did it happen?
Seems like
Right,
a
and
much
and
more sophisticated being.
and maybe and also more than a predator, because I think the other really big take on the Bigfoot entity is that it's frightening and malicious and
Mhm.
deadly, and I've definitely heard a ton of stories where people have seen one face to face and even been chased by them, they claim, and
Right.
that they were certain that they were gonna die. Um,
Mhm.
in my Whenever I see stories like that, I'm like, if it wanted to kill you, it would have killed you. So I think it was just trying to scare you away. Um, but it's really, I feel like society nowadays is really painting Bigfoot as a terrifying creature, something to be afraid of, and it's really gotten too far away from it being a spiritual creature, a wise creature.
Right.
And so,
Right.
do you know? Is it just because maybe if people stumble into its territory or something like that, and that triggers maybe this entity being protective and its goal
Mhm.
being to scare someone away?
Yes. Or also, how much does organized religion play a role in this? One of the stories that makes me think of this is in Ireland with the little people, where they used to have altars for the little people, worshiping them and so forth like that. And those altars were replaced with statues of the saints. And so here comes organized religion into their world 2,500 years ago. And how that had an impact on, the thoughts around pagan belief systems. And even in our modern day horror movies where it's like, you notice all the sinners, they always die, but the one that's kind of pure of heart and mind survives. And it's kind of in the backdrop of the psyche of the whole movie or the story. But we come back around to this whole thing where, in terms of organized religion, recognizing the fact that, no, there's not one true God, because that's like saying that all the native tribes on the Northwest coast are all heathens because they didn't believe in Jesus, from some guy that lived in the Middle East and all the activities going on there when they lived in this isolated place on the Northwest coast, or
Right.
the Brazilian Amazon, or you name where around the world. And so and it's something that they don't like to have a belief system other than theirs. And so, and this is, and they've done an amazing good job at keeping that stuff. And now, I mean, now we're coming out with this whole thing of recognizing diverse cultures, diverse thoughts, and this whole, shall we call it, an awakening, when really with a lot of historians and so forth, they've been studying this stuff for centuries. And so it's
Right.
something that within certain circles, this is not news. Um,
Right. And so do you think part of the misunderstanding is why when people do seem to have stories, at least in maybe in the US, if they're not part of um maybe a native heritage, that their encounters seem to be negative, maybe just
yeah,
accidental ignorance?
yeah, and I think also, I mean, even with the thing that I ran into, it wasn't something like, "Hey, come cuddle up with me." I
Mm.
mean, it was definitely, a real heavy, um, and with what felt like a lot of malice. But one of the messages, and I swear it just burned in my mind, was that I was holding a flashlight, and I seemed to hear him say to me, "Don't even think about it." You know, don't you go putting that flashlight on me. Sorry, you're not the cop and I'm not the perpetrator.
Ah.
And so, and but this is also where we get into this world of right or wrong and good versus evil. And, what does that mean to us versus what would that have meant to if I was a shaman and I was seeking knowledge from these things and crying for luck? And here he comes, and here's my chance at glory. I mean, here's my chance at, at receiving, very invaluable information that helps the tribe, that makes the shaman powerful. And so,
Yeah.
it's something, and that's where you get like, I think Paulides wrote a book. David Paulides wrote a book about this, where he went on to the one of the reservations, and the thing about it is, if you talk to the natives around the bars and hanging around, town and so forth, they're going to see this thing as a very evil entity. But if you talk to the berry pickers and the ones that are out there in the forest, they have a completely different story. And so because
Just a
they're out
better
there all the
understanding.
time. Yeah. And so,
Yeah, that makes
so
a lot of sense. Well, and I
y-
really like that perspective and opening up yourself. And oh my gosh, if you are approached by one of these, I don't know what to call it because I feel like Sasquatch and Bigfoot isn't as respectful as it needs to be if this creature is, coming with all this wisdom and, um,
Protection.
yeah, yeah, and essentially guidance for people who, if it's shamans that they're working with, clearly have to reach a certain caliber of maybe enlightenment or advancement or development in order for one of these creatures to approach you. So, gosh, what's your favorite name for the Sasquatch? What do you tend to call it?
oh, there was one I heard, the Matakagmi. I think that's the Modoc. Um,
Matakagami.
yeah, and but they come in different names. I mean, there's the ones that, I mean, I don't really like the Yurok one, which is Uma'a or Uma'a. Yeah, and it just depends on how you pronounce it. Um, probably my favorite is the tribe that I know the best. I don't know. It's the Marukarar. So Maruk means upslope, Saruk downslope. This is why you study the language. But basically, the people that live up there. And
Okay.
another point I was going to make on that also was that when you think of it in the regard that these things are literally protectors. So my advice to people that might have the opportunity to run into one of these things is to, you don't step forward and you don't step back. You just be who you are and carry love in your heart. I mean, like one of the lessons I learned here, because I'm down in Southern California right now, was taking water out to the rattlesnakes, because we live in a place that's been very dry, been affected by drought. And so I set up these water stations, and I've learned a lot from the rattlesnakes. And they're actually, they to the local Serrano Indians, they consider them sacred beings, and that's because they do so much for the natural world. And it's been just a fascinating experience with them, where you let them approach you, and all of a sudden, what that does, it changes the whole dynamic, where it's like you're completely freaked. Oh my god, a rattlesnake. What would happen if he's rattling and you stepped away far enough where he stopped rattling, and then you sit down and then you sing a song or you do something where he gets curious, he'll come over, and you just don't make any sudden moves. And no, you don't want to pick him up or anything like this. You want to have control over him, and he doesn't want to have control over you. So it's like you're meeting on a mutual ground. And and that's one thing with wildlife in general. they'll teach you lessons like this, when you spend enough time out there with them. And it's
I feel
amazing.
like this lesson could be applied to a lot of things in life.
It could, indeed. Indeed. Pets, your
Pets.
animals, yeah, when you meet somebody's dog and he's kind of growling and so forth, and you approach in a way where the dog's now completely comfortable with you. And sometimes you meet people where, it's like the dog's just growling and mad and barking, wants to bite them. Why is that? What energy is that person putting off that creates
Mhm.
that kind of bad?
That's a really good, yeah, like Josie said, a good rule for a lot of things. That makes a lot of sense though about how this creature would react to someone either based on their energy or how they're being approached. So
Right, right.
I
I think
gotta say,
that
I'm not scared of Bigfoot anymore. I'm
no, I agree.
actually delighted at this point.
Uh-huh.
It seems like we could be buddies.
We could be buddies,
Distant
Josie.
distant buddies, but
Yeah. I mean,
Respectfully distant
yeah.
buddies.
Yeah, and especially where, it's part of the fabric of the landscape. It's sort of like running into bears out there, and your reaction if you're bear, well, the bear's going to freak out too. My God, there's a bear. Where is he? Your reaction can say it all.
Oh, Greg, and I wanted to ask you, for your book, Ridgewalkers, can you tell us about what that book is about? Does it incorporate the Immortals and the Giants in but like both of those entities in there?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And I basically what I did there was I just made it where it's got the elements of story in it. So you've got the protagonist and the antagonist, and you want to have a strong antagonist. And to me, that was really important. Where, in a way, you could make a case where, if we shot one of these things, we went out and killed one, we'd have physical scientific evidence that could create habitat for them, do all these things where we'd recognize them. Okay. So that's kind of an argument in this whole thing. Of course, my guy Alex is more aligned with the natural world and wanting to follow those important tenets and guideposts that would lead him, that would help him on his journey. And that's where he became simpatico with these entities, because they obviously represent that also.
Wow. When did you get the idea for this book?
It was about right when COVID hit. But actually, I've been working on it for the last probably 6 years, and I just it's a series of stories that I'm writing about my family. I just started with me just because I thought, okay, this will be my test case to see what it's like to try to market it, what it's like to in terms of doing the edits, all this kind of stuff. My other stories I want to write are going to be more like military history
oh,
and
Mhm.
interesting.
and the crazy stuff my family experienced.
Oh,
And so,
wow. So
um,
so there's more books coming out after this one, and that's really exciting. I'm glad you started with Ridgewalkers, because, of course, it's definitely in our realm of interest.
Yeah, who
Um,
doesn't love a good story like that?
yes.
yeah, I mean that's it's almost like trying to explain ghosts,
Mhm.
and paranormal, and as far as like how could you make a scientific case for ghosts, and what creates them, why are they there, you know yeah, tough.
That portal theory really ties it all together almost.
Right. It can.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about where, when you get into the scientific realm of this, it's like we don't know what we don't know. And that's one thing that's fun with someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, that at least he explains it in lay terms of what we're witnessing, or what this is about. What is the Hadron Collider? What is a warp in the fabric of the space-time continuum? And explaining these things, you know, um, in ways we understand.
I'm gonna ask
Yeah.
him to, explain the spirit realm and Bigfoot for us next.
Well,
Hopefully he'll respond.
no, Neil deGrasse Tyson won't. I think he was asked about death once, and he's like, "Well, I don't know. You
Yeah.
you decay, and you go back to, the earth."
Hmm.
And he
Yeah.
didn't he didn't
Well,
he didn't
he's
touch the
not
spiritual
wrong.
realm with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
A lot of scientists don't, and a
Yeah.
lot of that is, but yet it's interesting because one of the ways you could peg him on that though, is that scientific theory and, building it up to that theory that becomes fact versus belief. And so,
Mhm.
do you believe? I mean, that's an often question I get asked on these podcasts. Greg, do you believe? I have a hard time structuring that framework that would bring about my belief in the way with which they interpret belief. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, it's we can't know, and that's the best place I think for us to sit is just being open to the information we have, knowing that we can't have all the information and hoping that we get more and more as time goes on.
right.
Your research definitely helps with that. I don't
Yes.
think I've ever heard this kind of historical approach brought to the idea of Sasquatch and Bigfoot
Mhm.
and the little people I had never even heard of, which is
Yeah.
bonkers to me now because they seem just as prevalent as the Bigfoot.
Well, yeah, an example of as far as this thing being a physical being is I think like the Pendak orang, which would be or the orang pendak there in the central part of the Sumatran rainforest. And I say that because now you've got this thing that stands 4 feet tall. He's in a double to triple canopy tropical rainforest in a very remote region. The native guides and so forth believe in this thing. They've seen him at least a few times, but he's small enough, and this kind of goes into the Homo florentii, this one right here, the lost world of the little people. And this has come up several times in the news and so forth. Joe Rogan just did a show on this. And, so this is Homo florentii. And the thing with these guys is that they're in the fossil record. We have physical evidence of them existing. The other thing that's interesting too with those Pacific islands is just like people, where in order for them to survive over the course of time, they had to co-evolve down. And so they could not survive as a 6 foot being, but they could survive as a 4 foot being. And and all the animal world followed that same pattern to be just for survivability on those islands. Yeah.
That's
Like,
right, that's right, that's why we don't have gigantic 100-foot lizards anymore,
Oh,
which
right.
thank
I'm grateful
Yep.
God.
for.
Yeah. Yeah, the same thing with the megalodon and all of these creatures, the short-faced bears, and all
Mm,
these. I mean, those are a lot more, a lot more sexy, or a lot more terrifying because they're so big. The dire wolf and the
that's right.
saber-toothed cat, and all these guys. Yeah,
That's right,
there's a,
the true predators, the ones
yeah,
that
I
don't
mean,
care about enlightenment and wisdom and guidance. They're just
yeah,
hungry.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind of like who wants to learn about the Shasta ground sloth when you've got that was the prey, as opposed to learning about the predator.
It's
Um,
true.
Yeah. So
Predator's always more interesting, which I
well,
think
yeah.
is part of our pull towards Bigfoot. Um, but and do you think that has anything to do with why little people aren't as well known that because 'cause they're not viewed as predatory?
Well, I think it goes into religion. And so we're back around to, this proprietary viewpoint of that there's only one true God. And so, and the last thing they want to do is say, oh, well, there's actually about 615 of them, you know, because that just dilutes the whole thing around Christianity and basically having a captive audience towards that. And so,
Yeah. So just
and
suppressed. So
yeah,
the whole topic's suppressed.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, with the little people, this is the thing is that, you're diving into their gods and heroes. And in some places, certain places, not all, but certain places around these wilderness areas and national forests and public lands, you are walking in their church. And, damn it, you better be respectful. Because these things can be very malevolent. There's some stories around that too. You want to be very respectful when you're in those areas. And you obviously want to be aware that, hey, this is a tribal area. And so we want to be really, really cautionary and don't litter and just be, I don't know, with a lot of love in your heart and really
Yeah.
enjoy your time out there.
I think that's an excellent point to make no matter where you are, even if you aren't consciously aware of the other beings that are inhabiting that area. Just do it for the earth, do it because you love the earth and you love yourself and
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And Greg, if our listeners wanted to find your book, how would they find
Okay.
it?
You can find it on Amazon. It's up there. It's Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds. I also have my website, theridgewalkers.com. And It can be located there, or you could email me directly, gwalter2017 at gmail.com. So GWALTER 2017 at Gmail. And yeah, I would love to communicate with any and all on the
I
topic
think that's so
thereof.
great. Well, I love your website. I love your blog posts diving in more to the immortals, the little people, the giants, and I really enjoyed reading the first chapter of your book. And I could already tell your first chapter left me on a cliffhanger, and I was like, "Ooh, I need to know what happens
Gotta
next."
keep going.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yeah. So you opened it up really well.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
One,
Yeah,
you're
that was
you're just so good about bringing this topic into light. Like you're so it just seems like such a real thing when we're talking to you. And at this
mhm.
point, I'm a believer.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's but this is great. I love being on these podcasts, and you guys are doing a great job. Yeah, keep
Oh,
it up. Keep up the
aw,
good
Thank
work.
you.
thank you,
There's
Greg. Well,
there's a lot of interesting areas out there. So
so many, but I think we're gonna have to explore cryptids more, explore the little people more, and explore Bigfoot more, Josie. So, are you
right,
down?
Oh,
right.
I'm in. I'm always
All
in.
right,
Yeah, I mean,
awesome.
look no further than Santa's elves. You know, little people.
It's Christmas.
Exactly. Oh, Josie, I have so much to cover. So much to
Right,
cover for
right,
Christmas.
right. Thank you guys. I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you, Greg. We
Greg.
loved having you on. We really appreciate it. Do you have any social media that our listeners can follow you on?
I so I am on Facebook as Greg Walter author, and I'm also on as Greg Walter kind of insurance. I do a lot of local history pieces, and so the history of Southern Oregon, going back to the gold rush, and even like history of Forest Service trails, natural history. It kind of ties in with everything, and so I'm trying to post on both places. I've been kind of out of it, but I'm going to jump back in it, and you guys have inspired me to do so.
Awesome.
Yay.
Well, we appreciate it. And so please go check out the website, which is really phenomenal, and take a look at Greg Walter's book, Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds. Greg, thank you so much for being on with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Make it a great evening out there.
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Until
Until
next
next week,
time.
stay
That's right.
spooky.
Stay spooky.